welcome to the Left Wing Podcast. On tonight's show, we'll be recapping the second round of Champions Cup fixtures. I'm Will Slattery. I'm delighted to be joined in studio by Luke Fitzgerald and on the line by Cian Tracey. And Cian, delighted to have you here with us. And we might start off with your experience over in Castres. Disappointing defeat for Munster. They took the lead with a couple of minutes to go but couldn't hold on. But I really, first and foremost, want to hear about your experience. Was there a cheese board in the press box again? Was the Castres president whining and dining the travelling press pack?
Well, you've given this the big sell, and I did really hope I was going to come back. A bit like Santa delivering a few gifts after my trip to Castres, but feels like a lump of coal because unfortunately there were no cheese boards in Castres. Bit disappointing considering the last trip in 2022, but a very good welcome nonetheless. They do this thing where, and it was the same in 2022, when you arrive into the press box, it's really small. Like, it's a proper old school club. I probably touched on it the last time I was there, that look, it's not the most glamorous place in the world, but like, it's just a classic French town where the whole place comes alive when the local team are playing. But when you rock into the press box, they're insistent that you have a very small beer, I should add, in case any of our bosses are listening. Not a pint by any means, but yeah, a very small beer. And then they come around at halftime to see if you'd like another one. So it just goes to show how different I think the French culture is. And like, all jokes aside, it is really cool to go over and see how like the French basically do things. We were allowed down around the dressing rooms and things like that. We met Jeremy Davison after the match, who was insistent on buying the couple of travelling Irish media a beer as well, which was a really nice touch. So while there were no cheese boards on offer, Will, we did get a very nice welcome, which is probably more than like you touched on there that Munster could say, because it was, other than that, it was a pretty tough night at the office for them.
Well, I don't even like cheese, so I'd much prefer like a beer before the match, a beer at half time, and another beer at full time. That sounds far better. Yeah, you said you didn't have much to deliver. That sounds a much better.
Bit of pop and Haribo for Will, the absolute animal over here. Bit of Vin Rouge and cheese. That's what you want out there now.
Yeah, well, times are obviously tight in Castres. I'd say they probably recycled through like 3 presidents since that guy was there.
Cost of living crisis.
Exactly. Yeah, no more cheese.
Small beers.
Plenty of small beers. Yeah, Cian said, very, very tough night for Munster. That it was a winnable fixture on paper. Obviously, Castres have that really strong home record. They've beaten La Rochelle, they've beaten Toulouse at home this year. But Munster picked up so many injuries. But besides the injuries, the performance was so disappointing, wasn't it? Like, the passing was off through a number of forward passes. The scrum was destroyed. Their line out at key moments faltered. In the air, they were kind of probably they weren't great there. Jack Crowley's performance, we'll talk about in a bit more depth a bit later on. It was a tough night for him. So even though there was all those injuries, their performance I thought was still so disappointing.
Yeah, and the one thing you probably haven't touched on there, Will, is the fact they conceded 17 penalties. I mean, you're not going to win. You're going to win very few games if you concede 17 penalties, let alone going away to what is a very difficult away trip to France. And look, it might not be the most glamorous club, but there's a reason why Castres are unbeaten there this season. I think Jeremy Davison is doing a really super job. It sounds like he's going to be actually leaving at the end of the season, which is strange enough. I wonder if the club are having any second thoughts about that. But from a Munster perspective, Will, you're right, and even allowing for how badly they played, it still felt like one that got away, because they put themselves in front with 9 minutes to go for the first time in the match, and they went down the other end of the pitch, casted, and they squeezed out a scrum penalty. Actually demolished the Munster scrum, and that was the big issue all night. It was something that Jeremy Davison touched on with us afterwards when he was chatting to us, that look, as soon as Dion Bleuler went off injured, who, by the way, I think has been an excellent short-term signing for Munster, quite clearly their best scrummager. But when Dave Kilcoyne had to come on, he hadn't played in, I think, almost a year. He had to come on and play an hour. Castres were always going to target Munster at the scrum, but they just absolutely stepped it up there again. You had Ollie Jaeger coming on in the second half as well. Hasn't played much lately due to injury. So Castres sensed the vulnerability there. And I thought they did something that Stad did in the previous week as well. They had done their homework and they picked off Munster with that lovely play down the short side with Adrian Papali at the line out. So it's pretty unforgivable, you'd have to say, for Munster to concede a very similar try to French opposition 2 weeks running. But yet, like I said, they put themselves in the lead with John Hodnett's second try, and Crowley kind of silenced the home crowd, who were going absolutely nuts because Christoph Ridley, the referee, had obviously binned 3 Castres players. And that's another thing I'd say when Munster reflected on the defeat yesterday or today, whenever they did. Castres had 3 men sin binned. Now, I think Munster were pretty lucky, Stephen Archer in particular, that he didn't find himself in the bin as well, particularly for that second high tackle in the space of a couple of minutes early on. But to not be able to find a way to win with those 3 yellow cards, having been in the lead with 9 minutes left, I'd say it was really tough to take. And it's put themselves in a tricky position now, Will, because they have Saracens at home after Christmas, which I know they're not the force of old, but that will be an extremely tough game. And then they have to go to Northampton away in the final pool game. So they've left themselves with plenty of work to do to get out of the pool, which I suppose you could say is classic Munster in a lot of way. But the discipline and the scrum in particular would have me pretty concerned.
Yeah, Northampton going to the Bulls and winning with the bonus point, and Saracens going away to Stade Francais, and then Stade getting another man sent off, and Saracens getting that away win.
That was wild.
Well, with a wild tackle to say the least. That puts Munster in a very difficult position. Like, that was a game they really had to be winning if they wanted to kind of top the pool, probably, and get into mix for home games further along in the tournament. But from their performance perspective, like, what jumped out to you? Keane touched on a few things there. Like, what disappointed you?
I try not to cover too much old ground. I think the first thing that jumps off the page was the yellow cards. I think that second yellow card, I don't think they scored, and I think Cass scored a penalty actually from a scrum off that. So that to me was kind of that hurt bad. I think you're kind of saying, okay, well now we're Munster should be in good shape here. Let's kick it on a gear. Let's punish Cass a little bit. And I just never really felt like they got into the game. They got any rhythm. They got on top of Cast. I also thought defensively they were a bit passive at times. Like, you think of the quick tap where I think it's Poppy Lee is he I think he gets it, but like, it was a really passive tap. I don't know if it was Farrell. I think it was Farrell in the back of my mind. He just doesn't come up hard enough. Like, you're not going to belt a guy like that. Like, he's a serious athlete. He's a big boy coming at serious pace. But the collision, you can't stop and wait for the collision. I thought the collision needs to happen further back because you're not going to be knocking a guy like that backwards. So I just feel like that was a little bit of a soft one. I don't know. Did you feel the same or no?
Yeah,
that one I was like, that's disappointing. They're the ones, if you can hang on there, eke out a penalty somewhere, it kind of deflates the opposition team a little bit, even if they're at home. They're going to come again. But I thought it just felt like a soft one, I thought. And then, look, I think it was some straight kicks as well. Obviously it hurts. The last one particularly is like just a little bit unforgivable. I know it was a lovely bit of play from Cass to keep the ball in, but that one's got to go out. And then the few in front of the post as well. Will, I just felt like it's a little bit mixed. I know we're not on Crowley yet, but you got to try and help your team out when it's not going well. Think of all the injuries they have, all that kind of stuff that they're dealing with, changes of coaches. He was the international 10 for Ireland starting. It's obviously probably up for debate at the moment whether he still is in that position or not come start of Six Nations, but he needs to be a reliable guy in there for them. It's going to be difficult for him. He's going to be going backwards, but things like kicks, that's where he can kind of he can control that himself. That's all on him. That's not on anyone else. And I feel like I'm being a little bit harsh, but at the same time,
no, I think it's
fair. Yeah, like, he's Ireland's starting 10.
I think
I hate to kick a guy when he's down.
Yeah,
that's what it feels like at the moment.
Yeah, because I thought his line kicking generally in the game was very poor, and I thought if you contrast that with what we saw, I know Leinster ended up fluffing most of those lineouts, but Prendergast gave them really good field position for those penalties. Like Crowley, obviously he was trying to bite off a bit more at the end, because some of the ones up to that point I was like really taken aback. I was watching the game with a friend and we were both kind of saying he's not even aiming it towards the corner flag, like even trying to get anywhere near. There was one in particular that I think the penalty was on around the 10-metre line, and he only got like a 5 metres into the 22.
He's got to think what's the difference between so that last kick, what's the real difference for the team of being 5 metres back? I don't think there's a massive difference. I'm not like that's one where you just got to get the thing out. You got to give your guys a chance. Remember, if you finish on a pen there as well, he's got another shot. So I don't know, that to me felt like a bad mistake, and rough enough night for him. So I'm hoping he bounces back. I just don't want to see this now kind of a bit of a tailspin happening with him. I don't think that. I think he's kind of strong enough mentally so far. But
I thought he played really well against Stade Francais. Obviously, Stade weren't up to a huge amount, but I thought he played well. I thought
he was good, yeah.
I thought he played well when he came off the bench against Australia. So it's not as if he hasn't kind of bounced back already, but I thought he was quite poor on Friday. Kim, what was your perspective? You were obviously at the ground, maybe gleaned a few additional details on what we saw on TV.
Well, I'm not sure how clearly did it come across on TV how poorly he was actually striking the ball. Like, I mean,
but the penalty attempt that went short was very I was kind of
wobbly.
That was right in front of us in the press box, and it was a very strange kick in terms of the connection that he got. He just seemed to really scoop it under the ball and just didn't get the connection at all. But I mean, they're the kind of kicks, again, if you're going away to the south of France, that you really have to be nailing. And it was just as well that Castres had a nightmare from the tee as well. And look, it was a bit windy over there. I don't think the conditions were horrendous by any matter of means, but I think you're dead right, Will, to point out the fact that Jack Crowley has actually bounced back well. He was excellent off the bench against Australia along with Craig Casey, and he did play very well against Stade. I know they obviously finished with 2 men sent off and they weren't up to much. So I don't think, and I'm not saying you guys are doing that at all, but I don't think there should be a narrative that, like, he's really been struggling since the kind of Sam Prendergast debacle in November, because I think he's already shown that he's bounced back well. But there's no doubt, I would say, that it probably has taken a toll on him. I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago, the week after the Australia game, leading into the Stade game, and he spoke with real confidence that, of course he's going to be like that publicly at least, but I have to say I did believe in what he was saying in terms of how the month had gone for him. He admitted obviously that it was disappointing, but he believes the competition is going to make him a better player. And I think that will make Sam Prendergast a better player as well. But at the same time, if you're in what is now very much a heated battle for that Irish number 10 jersey, I think going away to a place like Castres, okay, it's not quite a Toulouse, it's not quite a La Rochelle, as tough as it is. They haven't been beaten at home, but they're not a formidable French team, if we can say that. And I think they're the kind of venues that you have to be nailing the basics on in terms of your shots at goal, your line kicks to touch. Like, you had that one at the start of the match as well, which was also pretty important because it allowed Stade to go down the other end of the pitch, Castres, to go down the other end of the pitch. And a few minutes later, it led to the try. So I think that will be a blot on his copybook when the Six Nations does swing around, because as much as we'll say that the Interpros are important, there's going to be so much rotation, I think, over the festive period, that I think the Champions Cup games, when the teams are locked and loaded, is where Simon Easterby, obviously as interim head coach, is really going to be judging you on. So look, I know Sam Prendergast went well at the weekend, but he missed a couple of kicks as well, didn't he? So the debate is very much still on, but games like Castres, I think, are where Jack Crowley needs to nail it.
Yeah, you made the point. Obviously, who had the more difficult task this weekend? Like Sam Prendergast playing in a Leinster team at home, or Crowley going away in a Munster team who've ravaged by injuries and not playing well? Probably Jack Crowley, but to your point, the stuff within his control he didn't nail, and that's what's going to be very disappointing for him. And that's something, as Cian said, that will be a blot in his copybook, because if he nails those basics, Munster, despite playing pretty poorly, probably win, and they're still, punching, trying to get that top seeding in their group.
Yeah, because if I'm thinking about the two players, where I feel like Crowley will have kind of a bit of an edge on Prendergast is if he looks like that super solid, dependable guy. Because you're still talking about kind of Prendergast's age. He's probably, he still looks to me like he's a bit of a bag of bones, even though he looks like he's a big enough kid. Like, he will be a great athlete. I think it looks like he's got the pace, which I was really surprised about. So I think he'll get there. But at the moment, I think I could see an injury or two in his, in his journey just at the moment. Just a young player. It takes a lot out of the body the first couple of years that you're playing international rugby. And I think where Jack gets in the team for me is if he looks super solid, if he's kicking kind of 90% of his goals, even in relatively difficult conditions. If his line kicking's really solid, he's a great tackler. He's physical. you know, if it's passing, if he's just doing, Cian alluded to the basics. If they're really good for Crowley, I'm thinking, okay, well, I've actually got a serious decision here, you know, because Easterby will want to put his best foot forward there. This might be an audition for him. I mean, you hear kind of some rumours about, you know, different, you know, countries being interested maybe in Easterby. One that's fairly close to home that I think would be maybe a nice fit for him. So this is a bit of an audition for him, I think. I think he might pick the guy that he thinks is the best for Ireland to win the games, but also the best for him to win now. Could be wrong on that, but that's my sense, is that if I'm Crowley, that's what I'm thinking. I want to be looking super solid, Mr. Dependable. I got you through the tournament. I won the tournament for you last year. I was the guy for you. You can rely on me. Your man looks pretty jazzy, but you know, he should be on the bench because he's kind of the flashy guy and the nice skills. So that's my thinking on it, Will. And I just feel like that was a bit of a step back for him on the weekend, even though Prendergast wasn't unbelievable and had a few kind of shaky moments himself. I think that's, if you look at the difference between the two players and why you might select one over the other, it's the dependability for me.
Yeah, like, it's off topic, Cian, but I am intrigued, just as Luke mentioned it there, but Simon Easterby, like, what scope he will have to put his own stamp on the Ireland team. Like, if Andy Farrell obviously invested a huge amount in November into getting Prendergast up to speed, presumably with a view of him starting in the Six Nations, but if Simon Easterby can kind of go against his boss's wishes in a sense and say, actually, I'm not going to start Sam Prendergast, or I'm going to make this change or that change, I'd say Andy Farrell has given him a fairly limited latitude to make those sort of changes, because Andy Farrell ultimately is going to be coming back in and taking back over, so he wouldn't want, I presume, Simon Easterby going in a massively different selection direction.
Yeah, I was just wondering if Luke was going to follow through and mention the rumours that are doing around, but obviously he bit his tongue. So
Wales!
Yeah. Bingo. I'd be very surprised, purely because Easterby is coming into a very well-oiled machine. Now, I know, like, we can argue the merits of November and how well Ireland played, and I think we'd all probably agree it was a pretty average month on a whole. But he does have a solid base to play off. And look, it kind of goes back to the point I just made about Jack Crowley in terms of nailing it in those big Champions Cup games. Of course, what both players did in November will count for something by the time the Six Nations comes around. But those two Champions Cup games just before the Ireland squad go to Portugal are going to be massive as well. So like I said, Munster are playing Sarries in Northampton. Leinster are going to La Rochelle, who in my mind are still going to be contenders for this Champions Cup. I still think they're a big game team on their day. And then they're going to play Bath as well. So like, if Sam Prendergast goes over to La Rochelle and struggles, like, that could tip the balance back to Jack Crowley. On the flip side, if he goes to La Rochelle and steers Leinster to a big victory, then it would be very hard to argue against him by the time the Six Nations comes around, because when we were having the debate in around November, Sam Prendergast was not Leinster's first choice 10. Now he is, because the dial has been moved by Andy Farrell by his selections in November. So that's just the 10 side of things, Will. I'd be very surprised, though, if we see anything majorly different in the Six Nations under Simon Easterby, because I think he's been the longest serving Ireland coaching staff member that there is. I think he knows how these things work. He's not going to have a huge amount of time with the players. Like I said, they'll go to Portugal for a week and a half, I think it is, before the Six Nations, into the run up to that England game, which is, it's actually mad like how quickly it's coming around, isn't it? Like, is it 5 weeks away, 6 weeks away? It just seems like the rugby schedule is utterly relentless at the moment, from November straight into Champions Cup. We've got the Interpros back into the Champions Cup, back into the Six Nations. So I still think there's time for other people to put their hand up if it's not just the 10 debate. I think those back-to-back Champions Cup games will shape a lot in terms of Easterby's thinking, as well as what happened in November.
It's kind of mad. Easterby has been in the Ireland setup since 2014, I think. Like, that's crazy. Like, 10 years.
Really good guy.
Yeah.
Honestly, really, really good fella. Very knowledgeable. Not surprised he's kind of stuck in there. I think, and I'd say he's been a fairly important part of the setup all the way through, actually. I think he's a guy you can rely on. He's smart fella too. I'm sure he brings a bit to the table. You don't stay in a kind of a setup that's been, let's face it, since 2014, pretty successful outfit. I don't think you stay there if you're not you're seen as someone who's improving things constantly and who's bringing something to the table, from a creativity perspective. So I'd say he's a coach that might be quite well sought after. So I don't know. I think he might, like, can he not have a little bit of autonomy? Now, the one thing you would say to maybe caveat that is that he's probably been involved in the selection committees anyway. So maybe he does think the same as Farrell. So maybe there is no change. But no, I just kind of felt like that's a pretty tight call anyway. You know, like I don't think that's by any means a done deal. And I think those matches, like if you were Crowley and you're Prendergast and you were kind of going, okay, well, like if it's being selected on, you know, on the kind of cup games, which two teams would you like to play? Now you might argue that Crowley maybe doesn't give you a definitive yes you're in, whereas if Prendergast goes well, he's definitely in. I think, you know what I mean. Those two teams, you're kind of saying, wow, like if you play well against them, yeah, we can rely on you in the big ones. You're ready. You know, obviously the La Rochelle one is the one that stands out, but Bath away would be tricky too.
Bath and Aviva.
Excuse me. Sorry. Okay, so like they're still two massive matches regardless. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a funny one, isn't it? Who would you rather be, Cian, in terms of the games?
Like, I think you would rather be Sam Prendergast purely because he's playing behind a pack that isn't going backwards. I know we're obviously going to get on and talk about Leinster's line-out issues, but if you're an out half and playing behind that scrum at the weekend, was it 5 or 6 scrum penalties that they conceded, and they were pretty poor around the breakdown as well. It's very hard for you, no matter if you're Johnny Sexton, if you're Dan Carter in your prime, to pull the strings. So I do have an element of sympathy for Jack Crowley in that regard, even allowing for the fact that he needs to nail the basics. But I'd say you'd only be human if you were thinking that, you know, if you were trying to maybe force it a little bit. And I think as a whole, Munster were doing that in Castres last weekend. They were running the ball from deep when I thought they should have been playing smarter. And, you know, is that Jack Crowley trying to, you know, prove something? I'm not so sure, but I would rather be Sam Prendergast purely because he's playing in what is the Ireland, you know, pretty much the Ireland team. He's playing behind the Ireland pack. He's got an Irish backline outside of him. Whereas, look, as we've seen, this Munster team is quite a way off Leinster's best team and the best teams in the Champions Cup. And I think to bring it full circle, Will, I think Friday night's performance and result probably showed where the gap still is, because like I said, this Castres team, as tough as they are not an elite French team. But you do have to obviously consider the fact that there was a change at scrum half. I think Craig Casey was obviously very unlucky. Like, what awful timing for the guy. He's been playing excellent, and there's a guy who I think if he had gotten the full game or whatever 70 minutes in Castres and played well after Christmas, over Christmas, I think he's starting to put a bit of pressure on Gibson Park, who I do still think is the first choice scrum half, but I didn't think he had the best November. I still think he's trying to work his way back to his best form after that hamstring injury in the summer. So it's really disappointing for Craig Casey. It's really disappointing for Munster, and I think it's really disappointing for Ireland as well, because we've just spent so much of the show already talking about the out half debate. But the more of those type of debates we can have, whether it's scrum half, whether it's front row, back row, I think it's the betterment of Irish rugby. So I think you'd have to take the injuries into account as well. Like Takir Abraham's another one who looks like he's going to be out for a while with a dislocated shoulder. Peter O'Mahony went off injured. So they're kind of guys you can't really afford to be out, I think, without when you're going to France. So I think that played a key role in Munster losing as well.
Yeah, and Dean Bluler as well, who you mentioned, like going off with a concussion, and there was other front row injuries. It was like, the performance wasn't great, but the injuries they suffered were just disastrous as well. And Craig Casey, I agree with you, was playing really well.
And at a time, could I just make a quick point on that, Will? At a time where Munster have made, since Graham Rowntree has left as head coach, they've made significant changes to how they're training. They've also made significant changes to the strength and conditioning department. I think the head of S&C has left. I don't think it's officially been announced yet, but I think Jack Crowley was the one to officially tell us in that interview that I was talking about a couple of weeks ago. So I think Munster, and we've been talking about this kind of in light of Graham Rountree's departure, that, you know, how they were training, the number of injuries that they picked up was obviously a concern. So they've identified that, they've made the changes, but there are certain injuries, like Craig Casey got that knee injury by getting his studs caught in the turf. Abraham's dislocated his shoulder by, I don't know what's the word you want to use, a robust tackle that on another day could have been a yellow card. So, sorry, my point is, there's certain things you can't legislate against. So I think Munster, have been really unlucky with injuries. It feels like deja vu when we're talking about this. But to be fair to them, to give them their credit, they have tried to rectify it. But some things are just freak occurrences, like some of those ones at the weekend.
And Bluler going into contact, like kind of head first into someone's knee, like that was not great technique from him. Still, obviously, very unlucky to get the injury. And it's a big game this weekend, Friday night. They're playing in Ulster. They're 11th in the URC, and then they have Leinster coming to Thomond Park. So it's a huge 2-week period, Luke, for them as well. I know with all those injuries, but still, they need to get something out of the next 2 weeks. If they lose both of those games, which on paper they could, then all of a sudden you're really chasing your tail to even get back into the top 8.
I think they nearly should. I think they're in a bit of trouble for the next couple of weeks. I think those injuries will really take a toll. I think they really need Pete back. So kind of hoping that that's not as serious as maybe we thought. I mean, you never like to see the way he kind of went off. You're kind of thinking, oh, that looks like a couple of weeks at least. So particularly, you think of Leinster. Pete could be really important there with the lineouts, with the way Leinster's lineout is. He could have a big impact.
He could steal 10 balls.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully he's back. I agree on the Casey thing. Like that hurts bad. We don't know. I don't know. We haven't had much word on Murray. It was an elbow or something weird. It sounds like.
He's going to be back for the Leinster game, I believe.
Okay, well that is good. Like because they'll need a bit of experience there. But like coming into this week, like Ulster, I mean, we haven't discussed their game, but God, I mean, they capitulated after in the second half, haven't gone up and decent first half. Some pretty good stuff. Went in a good position. Like, I mean, Jesus, like what a disaster in the second half. Some pretty awful display. So I'm sure they'll have been read the riot act all week, and you'd have to think there'll be some kind of response, particularly in Interpro as well. So I think that's quite a difficult one for them now. I'd nearly be back in Ulster. I don't know about you.
Especially because we don't will Munster, will they be able to play Jack Crowley, Cian, this weekend? Like, is he going to need a break at some stage as well? I feel like
they couldn't do that to them, could they?
I don't know.
Jack Crowley is 100% due a break. Ian Costello told us after the match in Castres, but I guess he's not going to be rested for either the Champions Cup game. So my thinking would be it's either going to be the Ulster or the Leinster game. And if I'm Jack Crowley, I'm banging on Ian Costello's door and I'm telling him I want to play, obviously in every game, but particularly that Leinster game in Thomond Park on the 27th. I don't think we're going to get the shootout between himself and Sam Prendergast, because I would be shocked. I would think he's actually played a lot of game time this season when you factor in the Emerging Ireland Tour as well. But I wouldn't be surprised if Leo Cullen diffuses that situation and maybe it's a Ross Byrne or something down in Thomond Park over Christmas. So Jack Crowley is definitely due a break, Will. Whether it comes this weekend, because Conor Murray is definitely ruled out for this weekend. Like I said, he's due to be back for the Ulster game. So Munster at scrum half are now down to Paddy Patterson, who you'd imagine will start, and Ethan Coughlin, who only got promoted to the senior squad during the summer. And then after that, they're down to 2 academy scrum halves. So look, it's a bit of a problem position. So I suppose my point is, do you want to be going up to Ulster with your third and fourth choice scrum half, and then potentially Billy Burns back against his former team, or Tony Butler? So they're big decisions that Munster are going to have to weigh up this week, because I don't think that Jack Crowley is going to play both Interpros and both Champions Cup games leading.
I expect
he needs to play. He needs to play at the moment. I think and Ireland probably need him to play as well. Like, I think he needs to be. I'm just going off.
Yeah,
off the numbers. I know. But I just feel like sometimes you just need to say, okay, you're off your feet till Wednesday. Like, he's not going to learn anything more by running more plays in Munster. You just keep him off his feet, play him in the games. Oh God, I don't.
Yeah,
they need him badly now. Like, it's like the last thing you need now is for Munster to have to deal with that as well.
This is the obvious game where they're going to have to rest people, because they're not going to rest them for Thomond Park against Leinster. That's like the big fixture they sell every year. Like, Munster fans would rightly be very annoyed who've bought tickets.
When just play him for both.
Oh,
that's what I'm saying. I'm not advocating he doesn't play at home, because that's the obvious one, because he can put his feet up there a bit more. God, I don't know. I think if I was him, I'd be banging down the door saying, "Play me. Just ring the review. Tell them you're gonna keep me off the feet Monday to Wednesday. I'll do a light team run on the Thursday, light one on the Friday. Let me play the games. I'll do whatever you need me to do to kind of get myself in fighting fit form. By the Thursday with all the recovery stuff. I want to be in the shop window at the moment. This is a kind of important part for him now.
The thought has occurred to me, like, what happens if they're told he can't play, and then they just pick him? Like, is it like you just get sacked immediately?
Who's paying him? Yeah,
you just get sacked immediately, or is it?
No, I'm not sure what happens there. Like, I mean, I just wonder sometimes if the player go. My point is that sometimes if I was the player, I go, let me make, like, push for me to be in. Say you've had the conversation. I'll talk to them if needs be. I'll let them know what the plan is. Let's have a discussion about this, because
he didn't play as much in November as you would have expected.
Exactly.
So there should maybe be some leeway there, because he didn't feature against.
It's not like
Fiji.
he did 480 minutes. He
didn't play against Fiji and then played was it 15 minutes maybe against Australia? I can't remember exactly. It was about 20 minutes maybe against Australia. So there should be some leeway there.
I don't know. I thought there might be.
I don't know, but I saw the quote that Keane's referring to of me and Costello. Like, he will presumably be rested, I think, this weekend.
Fair enough.
So, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We might go to the Leinster Clermont game then in the Aviva. Leinster 15, Clermont 7. Not a scoreline people probably expected, especially when it was 12-7 at half time. Only 3 points scored in the second half from Leinster was, very uncharacteristic. Well, sorry, there has been actually long periods of play over some games in Europe where they haven't actually scored that much, so maybe not as uncharacteristic as I mentioned there. But what stood out to you, Cian? Obviously, the line-out was disastrous, and it was funny. You alerted to me just before we started that Jackie Nabber at a press conference today was explaining it, saying that they were trying a new calling system, and they had to take their medicine almost with this new system. And I was like, God, like, there better be some explanation, because it was a disaster.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, are Ireland going to use the same explanation over the last bulk of the year?
Paul O'Connell saying, why didn't I think of that excuse?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But look, I mean, there's a lot of hangover, I would say, from both Leinster and Munster from what we saw in November from an Irish point of view. From Munster, in terms of compounding errors like they did in Castres, that they had a couple of line-out issues. Their line-out the previous week against Stade was excellent. I think it was 15 out of 15, but the line-out issues for Leinster at the weekend are so jarring, because I feel like we're constantly having the same conversation, and I know it's not the exact same Irish line-out, but it's fairly similar in terms of the personnel, and no one seems to be able to get a handle on what's actually going on. And you'd wonder, like, Paul O'Connell has come under pressure for how poorly it's been performing, and then you see the same players performing as poorly for Leinster as well. So maybe the players have to take.
You know what I was wondering, Cian? I don't know if this occurred to you watching the game. I was talking to my old man about it, and I was we were chatting through. It looked to me like they kept throwing to the back. They kept trying to hit, like so I remember there was one in the first half where they threw it over. The pod moved back beyond the 15. But they had literally lost the 2 lineouts before. And I'm thinking, a 15 to whatever, is it 18 meters? Whatever, I don't know what to say. It's a 15-meter throw. It's not hard enough for me. I've got to go 18 meters. I was just thinking, like, who's making the calls? So a lot of the time, what happens is, in terms of the calling structure, I think the call comes in from 10. So you have this call, you have this play, you want ball in a certain position. The 10 goes, right, this is the play. It's the next 3 or 4 phases are generally organised, maybe 5 in some teams, but generally it's the next 3 phases are kind of organised, and then it's just shoe A. But off the back of that, where you want to hit off the first strike play will often be dictated. That'll dictate where you want the line-out ball. But I was kind of thinking, I wonder, do they need to change this? Like, say, hold on a second here. You need someone to say to Sam Prendergast here, we're gonna try and get it at 2 and 4 here for the next 10 minutes. Any line out we get, we're just gonna try and get our hands on the ball. We're gonna get our thrower some confidence. That to me is like what an experienced player would do in that situation. If it's not working, if you're having a big challenge at set piece, you go, right. It's like if you're under pressure at the scrum, you go, get that thing out of there as quickly as possible. That thing, as soon as the 8 sees it coming, just go. Don't even worry about it. That sounds to me like what needs to happen. Maybe you need to sacrifice maybe some of those set plays and a bit of creativity there for another 10-15 minutes. Just get some confidence back in. Let the hooker and the line out jumper see the ball go into someone's hands on their own team, and just have a couple of plays where you shorten the line out up. You go, right, this is like 90% we get this ball, even if we're having a bad day out. And it just seems like to me, watching the game, I was going, how are they thrown to the back again? What's going on? Did that occur to either of you watching the game? Yeah, did it, Cian? Yeah, because I was looking at it going, what's going on here? Why are they not giving this guy a chance to see a nice throw into one of his own players' hands?
Like, logic suggests that throwing to the tail is obviously the hardest throw that you can do. Now, it's obviously the best place in terms of
course,
attacking from, but surely you would rather start, even for yourself, whether it's the hooker, whether it's the caller, whether it's the lifters, you would rather instill a bit of confidence before you're starting to go for the juggler in terms of the, the big throw to the back. And I think that that's been something that we've seen quite a bit, actually. And look, it's like, it's very same as the scrum. If an opposition team sense vulnerability, then they're going to put enormous pressure on you. And unfortunately now, the Irish or the Leinster line out, whatever you want to say, the Munster line out has a reputation for being extremely shaky. So I think even, I'm not going to say Clermont have an average lineout, because to be fair, they're doing really well in the top 14, and I think they deserve a lot of credit for how much they pushed Leinster at the weekend and how much they made them look ordinary at different times. But I think lineouts who you wouldn't imagine are the very best in the game are now sensing a chance to get after, whether it's Ireland, whether it's Leinster, and that is a big issue as well. So I wouldn't think there'd be any harm at all in just trying to go back to basics a little bit, just try and secure a couple of balls, get a bit of confidence flowing again, and then you can start throwing to the tail and run the fancy moves that you have. Because lads, this is something that we've been talking about. Was it like in the build up to the World Cup last year is when it was kind of really
Samoa? Do you remember the Samoa match? It was
shocking.
that was where it kind of
conditions.
yeah, exactly,
But we're still having the same conversations. Leo Cullen is obviously like a really good line-out tactician in terms of his playing days. Luke, you would have obviously.
So is Paulie.
But this is what I mean in terms of acumen. Leo Cullen and Paul O'Connell are two of the best line-out minds you could possibly wish for, and they're clearly struggling to put their finger on it as well. So it's a mess, and it's a mess that
it doesn't seem to me like it's one issue, Will. I don't know. Sorry, you look like you had a good.
Well, no, because one thing I had an interesting conversation with someone at the weekend. And I know you guys scoffed at me once before when I brought up a conversation I had at a wedding, but I'm going to do that again.
But another one from the bar still.
Will
gets all his best
complete Barstool conversation. But this guy, to be fair, played at second row in the AAL for a long time, so a lot more reputable than the guy I referred to the last time, who was just some random punter.
You have my attention.
Yeah, no, and he was saying he thinks the Irish lineout has become so easy to read because they don't do a whole lot of deception. He said he'd like to see them do 2 or 3, dummy jumps and make the opposition really guess.
I think they did that, Will. I think that's what happened at the World Cup. I thought it looked like it took forever to get the ball in at the World Cup, and I think they noticed that when we were watching it. That's what we were saying. We were like, way too overly complicated. The other lads just sitting there kind of in the same position going, well, okay, that's fine, do your moves, but as soon as we see him throwing, we're going up in 2 pods, try and get it over us. I thought that looked like New Zealand pickpocketed us there. South Africa obviously did a bit of a job when us there as well. I thought there was too much of that. So
this guy said this to me watching the Leinster game. There was very little movement at all. It was just like Clermont just knew where the ball was going every time, and they didn't have to guess very hard to
I would say,
those balls.
To be honest with you, I wonder, do they need to have a think about the calling structure and say, okay, right, if we're struggling, James Ryan or whoever's calling it for Leinster or whoever's calling it for Ireland needs to say to the 10, whoever that is, hold on a second, put us in a good position, you worry about the kick, we are going to worry about getting the ball back here. So whether we need to do shortened lineouts, whether we need to go to 2, go to 4 and drive things for an next couple of minutes. If we need to be negative, that's what we need to do, and that's what we're going to do. We need to have the ball here. We're far better off having the ball than not having the ball, and we're just going to get a little bit of confidence going, get a bit of momentum behind us, and that's what we're going to be doing for the next 10 or 15 minutes when you go to touch. So I think there's a bit of that maybe has to go on, but I also think the 10 probably should be realising that and saying, hey, listen, what do you need from here?
But this is meant to be the best team in Europe, or one of them, or the best team.
But it's in focus now. So everyone has, no matter what team you play, there's very few teams where you go, now there is a few of them, but there's very few that don't have something that you go, I think we're better than them at that. Like at the moment, for the last year, you're going to be saying the lineout is an area where you can get after these guys because they're pretty good around the pitch, they're pretty fit, they're good tacklers, generally speaking, they're good on the ball, they've lots of threat in different parts of the pitch now. They haven't been unbelievably incisive in Ireland or Leinster the last one, but they're still pretty damn good for the most part. When they, if they get momentum, if they hold on to it for long periods, they're tough to stop, right? But if you were looking at one part of the game to maybe attack these teams, it's the lineout. It's the lineout. It absolutely is. So you need to accept that now. You can't, there's no point in fighting against this now. What you need to do is accept that and go, okay, we're having a few issues here, and we need to figure out how to get this monkey off the back if we're having trouble in games and teams are getting on top of us, or it looks like they're reading us. That's my view on it. I don't know if that's something that you share or not, but
just to come in on that, I think we obviously haven't mentioned the fact that Dan Sheehan is out injured. Now, I know you could argue that the issues were still there while he was there, but I don't think Ronan Kelleher's throwing is probably his super strength, and I do think Ireland missed Dan Sheehan in that regard.
It wouldn't be Sheehan's though either, would it? Would you say his throwing is a super strength?
Because he's so good at I think he's a better thrower than
Kelleher. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, I do.
I haven't seen a massive difference.
In my opinion, anyway, I think he will be, not saying it's his super strength, but I think he's a better thrower than Ronan Kelleher. Also, just on your point, Luke, about the calling, I think calling a line out is one of the great underappreciated skills in rugby, and I think it's been interesting that Leinster are probably struggling for a caller, because James Ryan, would have done it all along, but he doesn't do it for Ireland now anymore. Tyke Byrne is the main line out caller, and I'm not even sure if that's his super strength either, because Munster have had their struggles too. I know Leinster last season looked to Ryan Baird to do some of the calling in the big games when he was playing. Ross Maloney did a lot of line out calling for Leinster as well.
Bernard Jackman had an article about that today. He thinks they really miss Ross Maloney. I see him saying he thinks he's a bit of a loss. He thought that was the guy in the setup.
But they're definitely missing, like my sense of, they're definitely missing a bit of line out calling acumen in there. Ironically, like RG Snyman could possibly be a very good line out caller. He's clearly a very good line out operator anyway, but I know, Will, you want to get on and talk about that as well. So I think, the art of line out calling, I think, is such an underappreciated skill in rugby, and I think Leinster are maybe struggling for that. And also, like, you should be, like, if it's James Ryan or if it's Ronan Kelleher, Luke, on the point that you're making about Sam Prendergast or the out half making the call, then like, it's a 21-year-old rookie out half. You should have the confidence to be able to say, well, look, we're not sure if this is the right call. It's not exactly Johnny Sexton calling the plays here as well. So I think the players need to step up in that regard as well.
Outside of the line out, what did you make of the performance?
I thought it was fairly muddled. Like, I thought defensively they look pretty good for the most part. Like, they're you can see the new system. They look comfortable in it now, I think. I mean, the try, when you think about what it came from, it was very fortuitous from a Clermont perspective. Bit of a freak one. I still thought they could have done a little bit better. But yeah, as I said, that was a bit unlucky. I think in attack they look very kind of muddled. There, they just don't look, as I used the word incisive a couple of minutes ago. They don't look very incisive, do they? I don't think, for the most part. They don't look like they're cutting teams apart as much. Maybe teams have figured them out. I don't think they look as tidy around the ruck as when they're really purring. When Leinster are really purring the last couple of years, I think they look like they're hard to get the ball off. I think what I'm liking a little bit is that it looks like they're taking it on a little bit more. Look to me like they mix it up a little bit better this week. In terms of taking it up with the forwards, a little bit of interplay here. Obviously, the Snyman break was the highlight. That was a lovely bit of play back inside to Porter, and then obviously the offload to Snyman. I still, the ball handling is not what it was when they're playing their best. But the pack, you heard me for about 2 years, Will, talking about the pack and how good the ball handling was. That to me is a little bit of a difference than that maybe is partly accounts for some of the drop off, I think, in the quality. I thought they were picking apart the other forward packs in the tight exchanges.
Someone mentioned earlier with Cian, I think, about Gibson Park's form. Like, he was creating a lot for Leinster last year. Like against Northampton at Croke Park, some of his passes to put James Lowe away. Against Leicester, I think, did he score a hat trick? Or maybe I completely misremembered.
I think the ball was in a better. I think it was on more of a platter. And I think the forwards were getting him a little bit more go for. I think they were getting more pay in the tight exchanges, which, if you think about what Gibson Park is really great at, it's thinking on the move, isn't it? It's, and like, if you think about his best, a lot of his best moments come from like a bit of Leinster. I always think a bit of Leinster interplay, in the kind of tight exchanges that go forward, and he just picks and goes, and all of a sudden there's a gap, or he puts someone else through a hole. He's really instinctive around there. Aside from the other ones, the kind of highlight ones where they're going wide and he takes that inside support line. The other highlight reels for me, a lot of Gibson Park is, he might pass to the first forward and get it back off the forward, or all these kind of really nice moments that he has around the ruck. I don't think he's getting as many of them. And I think it's for a lot of those reasons that I said. I think they've dropped off a little bit on the quality at the ruck. And I think the ball handling isn't as good. I think they're going out the back a lot to whoever it is playing 10. Don't have a massive problem with that, but I think they maybe are overdoing it slightly. And they're not backing themselves to break teams down in there. I think they should be backing themselves a little bit more, backing their skills, because you think of Josh van der Fleer, lovely hands, Caelan Darce, lovely hands. I'd be giving those guys a few more opportunities in the tight exchanges to go against big forwards who might be tired. Just a thought.
Yeah, anything else, Cian, you want to come in on?
The glass half full approach for me would be that, like I said, Clermont deserve a lot of credit for how much they push Leinster, and Leinster would probably be, in a way, glad of that challenge, because if Clermont had sent over a second team and Leinster put 40 or 50 points on them, what do they really get out of that? Where I'd say in training this week, they've had plenty to get stuck into, because they really only have to peak for the latter part of the knockout stages, because let's be fair, like Leinster are going to cruise their way through. So like that would be the glass half full approach. The opposite to that, I know their defense has been excellent, but I think the phase attack, and I agree totally with Luke, isn't where it needs to be. And look, obviously they're going to back their defense to, like, Toulouse is obviously the team that come to mind, because I do think Toulouse and Leinster are out on their own as the two firm favourites. Not that that's like the greatest hot take at all, but like they are the two strongest teams in the competition. But I think their attack is going to have to come on a lot to beat a team like Toulouse when it comes to it, because I think if you're relying on your defence to shut down a team like Toulouse's attack and you're not able to fire shots at them as well, I just think you're going to come off second best in that, because I think it's inevitable that a team like Toulouse will find a way how to unpick your defence once, if not twice, and that's all they might need to win another Champions Cup. So I would have concerns about where Leinster's attack are. I think I've already mentioned Gibson Park's form. They've obviously got a rookie 10 in Sam Prendergast, which would take a bit of time. Geordie Barrett is trying to fit his way into the team as well, so they do have a few
looks
issues.
like he's fit in to me.
Yeah, like absolutely. But I suppose more so where he's going to play if everyone was fully fit. But like, what a great problem to have. I thought he looked very good at fullback as well.
Sure.
Like,
doesn't he look like a top class pro, doesn't he? Like how seamlessly he's fit in.
yeah, and this is like a point that we were making on the show last week, that I think when a guy like Geordie Barrett comes in and does the basics so well in terms of like his catch pass, I'm thinking of particularly in the Bristol game, the timing of his pass, maybe the Leinster players will get a reminder of probably what they were used to be like under Stuart Lancaster, who I think has been such a massive loss for Leinster in terms of that attack, the phase attack. But maybe Barrett coming in that Kiwi kind of, mindset about, just your basics being world class might actually remind the Leinster players that we need to do a bit of this as well, because that was something we saw from Ireland in November as well, that their phase attack just wasn't where it needed to be. So I think Leinster have loads to do, if I'm being honest, and I know that might sound a bit harsh considering they've won every game this season, but I suppose Leo Cullen probably hit the nail on the head himself. If he said they're nowhere near where they need to be, then I suppose that's what the players probably feel as well. But they would rather be finding that out now in December rather than April or May next year when they're trying to peak for the big
steamroll a load of teams in a row is not helping.
Exactly, yeah.
Completely agree.
Well, I wouldn't underestimate them not picking up that bonus point and how important that can be. Like, you're looking at Toulouse are 10 from 10, Bordeaux are 10 from 10, Northampton are 10 from 10. Like, you want to be a top 2 overall finisher of the 4 pool winners to guarantee yourself home games throughout the knockout stages. Like, that's so vital in this tournament, as history will tell us. So Leinster still have to go to La Rochelle. They have to win there. Do they win there with a bonus point? If they do win, probably not.
No chance.
Yeah, it'll be.
That's
what I'm saying. So if they do win, it'll be an arm wrestle.
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden you're not going to be a top seed probably. So you can't, like, they really left a point behind them there. They had 2 tries on the board. Yes, Clermont did defend well. Like, Fintan Gunn didn't tap the bloody ball. Now that would have been a 3rd try just before full time, so they would. But that was symptomatic of the maybe a little careless, because you need every point in this tournament. And Leinster have traditionally been very ruthless in that regard. It's funny how, like, Toulouse and Bordeaux are actually in the same pool. So even though they don't play each other, like, only one of them can actually top that pool. So one of them can't even get a home quarter final, even if they win all their matches with bonus points, which is another kind of bizarre part of this tournament. But yeah, just looking at the points race, I wonder how that, maybe not picking up that bonus point could end up being crucial.
Yeah, no, it's funny, and it is like, it's fine margins here, that will be interesting to see how that plays out, But I think maybe no harm. I think, the armchair run in is, this team is capable of going and beating any team away from home in this competition. I believe that. I don't think they're playing well. I think Cian's right, but I think if they're on there, if they're firing, if they get the momentum back in their attack, if they start firing there and they can keep on top of teams the way they have been, defensively. Even Toulouse, they could kind of put them in a bit of a stranglehold. I agree with Cian, you might get a try or two out of them, but if they get their own attack going, I think they can score more than that pretty much in every team they play against. I can see this team doing that to other teams. So they've a lot to do, clearly. But I think they're in a good position, I think, at the moment to go and do that. I think they've got a fright at the right time. I think going away might be a good thing for them. Just get them out of their comfort zone, focus the mind, realise how hard this competition is to win. You don't get to sit back in your home the whole way through. It might be the way they need to go and do it. And maybe focuses the mind a little bit. So maybe no harm in that way. But yeah, I agree. They have definitely, it's going to be tougher for them now. And I think if you looked at that fixture before, you'd have said just where both teams are, the amount of players, the amount of internationals that are playing the Leinster team, what they had on the bench and Snyman and that, you would have had that down as a bonus point, generally speaking, for Leinster the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's their first pool game at home since like 2018 when they didn't get a bonus point or something like that. So going back a long way. Cian, the next time Leinster play in the Champions Cup, it'll be La Rochelle away. We were hoping we would get Skelton versus Snyman, but it remains unclear whether RG Snyman is actually allowed to start a Champions Cup game for Leinster. I
thought it was very clear, no?
Well, yes, I would say it is clear, but it technically...
But not answering that was the clearest thing ever, wasn't it?
I presume so, yeah. I guess. That's what I'm saying. Clear without being clear, in a sense. It's funny that Leo Cullen called Rudd asking him whether Snyman could start a very private question. I was like, oh, how is that a private question? It's about a team selection. But, Cian, what do you make of operating on, say, the basis of Snyman not being allowed to start if Ryan and McCarthy are fit? What do you make of that policy, that restriction? I don't agree with it. I think it's kind of bizarre, especially because James Ryan didn't start the Champions Cup final last year. Like, they opted to keep him in reserve for, I think, did Jason Jenkins start? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
So, like, one rule for Jason Jenkins, but for Snyman, who's even better, he's not allowed to start. Like, what do you make of all that?
I think it's a slippery road to go down, if I'm being honest. But Rudd's question to Leo Cullen last week was pretty pertinent because that was definitely the word behind the scenes when Leinster were given permission to sign Snyman, that they were going to be limited in terms of when they could use him. I don't think the same applies to Jordy Barrett. I actually was wondering at the time if there would be, but I don't think that's the case at all. And look, I suppose the reason why the IRFU have done it is to try and protect their assets in terms of, the two Irish starting locks, or at least two of them. But if you're Leinster, then you need to do what's best for Leinster. Leo Cullen, I would say, is under a fair degree of pressure this season to deliver a trophy, not least because he's brought in the likes of Snyman, Slimani and Jordy Barrett. So this is a bit of kind of almost a conflict of interest, because clearly one thing is good for Leinster rugby and the other thing is good for Irish rugby. And look, pound for pound, RG Snyman walks into, I would say, nearly any team in world rugby. So there's no reason why he shouldn't be getting into the Leinster team.
Except South Africa's.
Yeah, although has he started become a starter now? I'm not sure. I know they've still had a few injuries, but I just think he's an outstanding player. I think the line-out's been struggling. Look, we know what he does in open play, but you stick RG Snyman into that pack and who knows, the line-out could improve. So I think because of the circumstances, Will, and how it came around in terms of him being available for Munster, Jean Klein becoming NIQ when he got capped by South Africa, I think it was a very unusual deal that happened. And I think this clause that may or may not have been put in, I suppose we should probably say legally, as Leo Cullen didn't confirm it, suggests the unusual nature of it. But I don't think it's something we're going to see happen, in future, if Irish provinces are signing marquee players, that they're going to be restricted in terms of when they could use them. I think this is a once-off.
Yeah, if there is a restriction in place, I don't think it's healthy for a squad that, no matter how certain guys are playing, they have to start, or no matter how well a guy is playing, he can't start. I just don't agree with it. I just don't think it's good for a team to.
It's a funny one, isn't it? And I think as you say, I probably look. I probably wouldn't have agreed with the signing in the first place. On the kind of same basis that the people who allowed them to sign the contract with this possible clause that we're all suggesting is in there. We don't know 100% obviously because it wasn't confirmed to us, but we think it sounds like there's something in there. I think once you sign him, he should be, you're signing him, you either sign him or you don't sign him.
Either let him
kind of way, yeah. So it makes no sense that, I think if you sign him in the first place, you should be allowed to play him as you see fit. The squad, needs to be, it needs to be picked on merit. That's not a good thing. But look, maybe he doesn't care and he's happy enough and he's in a good setup and he gets to kind of rejuvenate his body, get to play, kind of 20-30 minutes every week. He's making a massive impact as it is. Inevitably one of the guys will get injured here and there as well. So he probably gets a good run of maybe 80 minutes there, when that does occur, because that will happen. But yeah, no, it's really interesting, isn't it? Like that to my mind was like, geez, I can't believe that. But I suppose when you think about the selections, what I had thought in my mind, which I presume lots of other supporters had thought, was that, this is just one of Nina Barr's kind of weird kinks where he keeps his best players on the bench. Do you know that kind of way?
Yeah.
What's really happening is you're keeping RG Snyman fresh until he wins his third World Cup in a row.
I just thought, I was like, okay, so he really does believe in this bench thing. He's going to be bringing him on like 45 minutes every week, but maybe there's more to it.
Yeah, because like he would be starting.
Oh, he would.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Like, but if you're looking at how he's played all season,
playing 70 minutes every week.
He'd be playing unbelievable.
He wouldn't even be like, say if the shoe was on the other foot, it was like McCarthy coming off the bench. Like they wouldn't be taking Snyman off as early as they've been taking McCarthy off for Snyman. I don't think. I think.
And I also don't think so we've been discussing the lineout for kind of 10 minutes. You know what I mean? You don't need to have a bit of a Devon Toner. Like Dev was actually a brilliant caller, apparently. I don't understand it well enough, but apparently he was a really, really good caller as well. But it does make it it simplifies it a little bit if you've got someone who's 6'10", 6'11" on there. You know what I mean? A good throw pretty much solves for that. You know what I mean? Provided the lift is reasonably okay. You don't need to get too jazzy. You don't need to have too much deception. Just get him up in the right position at the right time with a decent throw. And it would really simplify things for them. So yeah, he'd probably solve a few problems for them. And that physicality that he brings, Now I will say, pretty demoralising seeing him coming on 45 minutes when you played against James Ryan and McCarthy. You know what I mean? Like it is.
I don't think like it's not ridiculous to have him in that role.
I'd still rather have him. It's a 70 minutes argument, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not ridiculous necessarily to have him in that role. Just if there is a restriction in place, I just think that's a step too far.
It's silly.
Like there's a difference between Nienaber believing that he should be used in that way, which they do with South Africa and they've done it well, and being like not allowed potentially start him. Because, it's horses for courses. Say Will Skelton in January, they want to match him up with them from the get-go. But if they're like, but we can't until the second half or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's definitely one to keep an eye on, like for supporters, like that. If something will change in January, I mean, will more discussions happen behind the scenes in terms of his game time? Because if you look at the amount, he's actually played a lot for Leinster, which is brilliant because he's been fit. But he's played a lot in the URC when either James Ryan or Joe McCarthy haven't been around. But I think you only need to look at the selection for the last 2 weeks when McCarthy and Ryan were there and Snyman was on the bench to kind of figure out what may or may not be in that contract. But like I said, Leo Cullen didn't confirm it, so we're not too sure. But I would definitely watch this space because there might be a bit of trying to, please everyone as we go along. But when it comes to the crunch, whether it's the La Rochelle game, a semi-final, potentially away from home, maybe Leinster are going, well, if you want us to win a trophy or if we want to win a trophy, our best chance of doing so is starting RG Snyman. So I would watch this space.
Should we probably say while we're on the conversation, I thought Ryan had a brilliant game. Some great breaks. Brilliant around the ruck, I thought. He was very physical. McCarthy was good too, but a few sloppier moments from him. The one into the one hand was a bit of a sloppy one. But I think what you get, it's still a pretty formidable pairing.
It's that X factor that Snyman brings.
It is. No, I'm not denying that. He's definitely been the best of the three this season so far. No doubt about that. But I think it'd be a little bit remiss to not maybe mention, obviously they had their line-out troubles, but a lot of that was down to some kind of throwing too, possibly some calling. We're kind of obviously guessing there, but around the pitch the two boys were bloody excellent on the day. I thought, I don't know what you thought, guys, but for me I was like I was pleased for Ryan. I think that was a part of, we talked a couple of weeks ago about him kind of going away from that kind of that part of his game when he when he came on the scene initially. He was a bit of a threat, wasn't he, going forward, nice ball handling and things like that, whereas it looked like he got a little nervy the last week. You think of the Australia match where he kind of unusually kind of drops that one, Cole kind of close to the line, and you're kind of saying, oh, like, has he gone away from that, maybe gone too much down the kind of physicality route and that, But it was good to see him go through a few holes. He ran some lovely lines, and it was good to see him open up the legs a little bit, I thought.
Yeah, well, they've 3 good options anyway. So I suppose how they fit them in and what they're allowed to fit in, I suppose we'll be keeping an eye on, as Cian said. Cian, as we kind of come towards the end, Ulster, Luke touched on them earlier, like they were 19-14 up against Bordeaux against the odds at half time, and then a very, very difficult second half as Bordeaux kind of hit the kind of straps we might have thought they would. What did you make of that second half in particular? Because the first half they showed they threw some shots. They finally got, they started the guys that we were hoping we would have seen against Toulouse the week before, but they were targeting this game. At half time, it looked like a pretty shrewd decision from Richie Murphy, but then it didn't last.
Yeah, if a rugby match was 60 minutes long, they'd be happy out. But unfortunately, it's 80 minutes. And what did they concede? 4 tries in that last 20 minutes when Bordeaux ran absolutely riot. And look, I could understand Richie Murphy's logic in terms of what he did, but I didn't agree with it, I have to say, in terms of not picking his full team in Toulouse. I understand that Ulster have a big injury list, which actually got worse over the weekend. We've already touched on the injuries that Munster have, but Ulster have doubts over the likes of Izuchuku, Ian Henderson, Nick Timoney for this weekend's game against Munster. So I can understand all of that, but my fear of taking a pasting like they did in Toulouse was that it would carry through to that Bordeaux game last weekend, and it could potentially carry through to the Interpros over Christmas as well. They've shipped over 100 points, haven't they, in those 2 games? I mean, that is tough to take. Like, that's demoralizing for a team that will have expected whatever about going away to Toulouse, much, much better of themselves at home. They put all their eggs in that basket against Bordeaux, and the strategy just didn't pay off at all. So, Ulster, I think, are in a very tricky position. Look, I don't even know if you could call it. I think it'd be ridiculous to say it was a wake-up call, because I don't think anyone thinks that Ulster are on the same level as Toulouse or Bordeaux, who are clearly contenders. I'm not quite sure if they're on Leinster and Toulouse's level, but they're clearly contenders. But it just showed the gap that exists, and the gap, like, unfortunately for Ulster, you could argue the same for Munster as well, is widening between the very best teams and the chasing pack.
Yeah, just on Bordeaux, before I asked Luke about Ulster, like the way the pool draw has been teed up, and I mentioned earlier about Toulouse and Bordeaux being in the same group, like Toulouse have to go away to the Sharks and Bordeaux have the Sharks at home. Like, that's such a different, proposition. Like, you'll probably have to face Khaleesi, Etzebeth, Mapimpi, Grant Williams, all those guys when you go to South Africa. They probably won't be coming back up to face Bordeaux. So Toulouse, all of a sudden, despite being the best team in the tournament, might have a much trickier knockout path than maybe you would have expected them to at the start of it. But from an Ulster perspective, Cian touched on some things there. Very disappointing.
Yeah, and I think, it's probably right to split that second half up into 2 parts. Because there was a lot of good endeavour for the first half of the second half, if you can call it that. And I think probably could be pleased with the effort up to that. There was some kind of good stuff. But like to fall away that badly at home at the end, that's when you should be coming on to a team is that last part of the game. The crowd getting getting behind you. I thought when they were in that position, I'm kind of, this is like they could be on for a big win here. But they just, some of the tackling can't have it. Can't have guys missing, like the Timoney one on the second row. I don't know the Bordeaux's player's second row's name. Pretty awful. I know why you'd be chasing Pinot that hard, but he was in a perfect position, really soft tackle. He put in some really good work, in fairness, all the way through, but just sloppy. You can't make those kind of mistakes. And there was a few other ones that you could talk about. I'm not going to try and gut too many people, but it was like, that was a bad one to me for your 7 to be missing that tackle. Like, that should be, he should be your best tackler on the pitch nearly. Like in a one-on-one situation like that, you need to be thinking, oh, this could be a turnover opportunity for a really top class 7. They get back on their feet there with a dominant tackle. But yeah, just disappointing. I was disappointed for them. And I think with the week before, I was thinking, okay, this is good. I'm seeing a bit of a bounce back here. But then it all just kind of falls apart there. And you're kind of thinking, oh, geez, like, where's the momentum? And then you hear the injury. I actually hadn't looked at the injury issues, to be honest with you. I hadn't heard of, what the implications would be for the next couple of weeks. But some of those names would be a big loss to them. They need as many hands on deck as possible at the moment, because it's been tough so far this year. I kind of thought Richie kind of made some progress, but I think it's going to be a tougher job than we probably thought. I think there's a good bit more to go up there. There's a couple of years of probably development, but if he doesn't get some wins and he kind of has 20 minutes like that, the last 20 minutes at home like that, it puts him under pressure.
Yeah,
it does.
Yeah.
You can't have that. And it's not his fault because you can see he's done good stuff. But then when you give up the big score and you don't pick the guys the week before in Toulouse, like Ulster still like kind of they've won a European Cup. They're still a big team.
Friday's huge for them, isn't it?
Huge game for them, Will, and it's as well for the league table. You think of where they are. Like it's important that they get the win. Really important, and Munster are coming up, a little bit shaky themselves. So it is a big opportunity for them. I think they need to be, they need to take a few chances and they need to really go for this one on the weekend. It sounds like really obvious things to say, but they can't hold back here now. They need to win.
And it's hard to call a game must win at this stage of the season, but it does feel like a huge one.
It just
it's
doesn't
huge.
get
It's
pretty.
huge for both of them. It's the battle of the walking wounded as well in terms of both teams' injury lists. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see the team selections, and I'd say we're going to see a lot of guys who haven't maybe had a lot of game time this season, or guys who are on the fringes of squads because and it's a massive opportunity for them. Look, if you want to look at from the positive side, for them to put their hand up, because what is it, 10th and 11th, they're both down in respectively. Only 1 point separates them. So a win on Friday night for either team is going to be massive ahead of what is like this is a really crucial period for every team.
And Cian, one subplot from the game was Joey Carbery obviously playing for Bordeaux. There's the nice clip of him slotting that touchline conversion and then touching his ear, probably getting a bit of abuse from the Ulster supporters. It's funny like how quickly someone becomes not a forgotten man, but like he would have been the guy we would have been talking about as the out half. Oh, will he get in? Will he won't? Will he or won't he? And then obviously after being cut from Andy Farrell's squad, it was a kind of a slow march, ultimately going to Bordeaux. What did you make of his performance and just kind of seeing him back relevant and in the spotlight again?
If we were doing our moments of the week, that would have been a strong contender for me. The little cup to the ears. Look, the reason I liked that was because that's probably like that kind of attitude is probably something we didn't see enough of when Joey Carbery was here in Ireland. And look, it might sound a bit harsh, but maybe it's what held him back a little bit by not being a bit more aggressive, in terms of like leading teams during the week. Like that seemed to be something he paid the price for in that Fiji game a couple of years ago in particular. So this is what we all hoped for Joey Carbery, that when he went to France, by playing in this star-studded backline, that he'd find himself a little bit. He'd find his voice a little bit more. And I think, it was a big show of faith. Obviously, Bordeaux had left Mathieu Jalibert at home. And look, he seems to be going through some stuff as well. Obviously, a bit of a fallout, it looks like, with Fabien Galtier in the French setup as well. So might be an opportunity for Joey Carbery to get some game time over the next few weeks. I think it obviously helps. He's working with Noel McNamara there, an Irish-speaking attack coach who looks to be doing, look, I know it's probably a dream job for him in terms of the quality of players, but I think it's worth mentioning him as well. He's doing super stuff with that backline. They're just brilliant to watch, Bordeaux. But I thought Carbery did fine. Will, I don't think he shot the lights. I don't think it was the kind of performance where we were going, Munster need to get him back or Leinster need to get him back. But I think this move is going to be brilliant for him, and I think it'd be encouraging from an Irish rugby's perspective that if it goes well, that more players who find themselves in that position in terms of maybe having hit a dead end will go, you know what, maybe I will go off to France for a couple of years. Now, to be fair, the idea of going to Bordeaux for 2 or 3 years is pretty attractive. Not everyone will be as lucky as that to get such a nice deal, but I think Irish rugby needs Joey Carbery to do well, I have to admit, because if it does, then it could open different doors for other players, like I said, who've maybe hit a crossroads in their career.
Just before we finish up, Connacht obviously not as prominent given it's the Challenge Cup, but getting a good win over in Perpignan. They've started 2 from 2, didn't even kind of use their international players, Bundy Aki, Finlay Beelum, guys like that, Mark Hansen being rested. But a good 2 weeks for them. Like it's no harm for them to have a live interest in the tournament, even though they will be focusing on the league. Like if they could make a run on that, it would be pretty good.
Well, they're ahead of the other two, so yeah. No, look, I think it's great. It's been a fairly mixed season, I think, for them, but that's a great, like 2 in a row is brilliant, and the away from home against a French team, south of France, bloody tough. I've had played a few matches down there where, pretty unpleasant and things can go wrong pretty quickly there. So they can be really pleased. Interesting one this weekend, against Leinster. There might be a bit of hope there. They might be thinking, geez, Leinster are there maybe for the taking. And
rest a few players, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think they'll be focusing on this fixture, So we wait and see on that one. I think the difference between the two teams is going to be really the pack. I think the back lines, yeah, there is a little bit of a difference maybe, but not massive, not huge. Like I think Connacht's back line are pretty dangerous. Maybe not as good defensively as the Leinster back line. But they've got some big players in there, and if the pack can get some kind of parity, if they could, get on top of Leinster's lineup, that's an obvious place to start. Then you're kind of saying, oh, maybe there's a bit of a game to be had there. And Leinster, I think it's different for the Irish provinces come to the Aviva than, say, other teams. Like, I don't think they'll fear it. Lots of the players there know it well. It doesn't feel like as daunting a place to go for an Irish team, I don't think. So that probably factor is not there as much, not as prominent, certainly, for them. I think this could be a really good game. I think they have a number of guys who could open up this Leinster defence, a couple of times during the game, and if they can finish off a few of them, I think it could be a good game.
Yeah, it feels like we have some good Christmas Interpros to look forward to, as we do every year. But some of them games in particular feel like they're on a bit of a knife edge.
This could be a sneaky one for Leinster. This could be a bit of a banana skin, Ulster, like as you said, 2 in a row, playing some decent rugby, some big names you'd think would probably come back in for this one. I would imagine, surely, if you're Bundy Aki, you're saying this is the one I want to play in, because that kind of. That Ringrose, Aki, and Henshaw there's 3 of them now kind of vying for those positions for Ireland in the Six Nations. That's actually a pretty tight race now. Ringrose has kind of been shunted out at the moment, but he's pretty top quality and he's the really most natural 13 there. So, Henshaw was outstanding, I thought, in November. So. Yeah, I don't know. I'd say Bundy want to play. So hopefully he does.
An interesting one to watch. That's all we have time for tonight. I'd like to thank Luke and Cian for joining me on this week's episode of The Left Wing. Until next time, thanks for joining us and goodbye.